Hello, everyone. Good afternoon. Greetings from Brussels. It's a lovely sunny day. While we're waiting for everyone to join, I have a question for you. Can you use the reactions, the hand up function in the reactions, and tell me if you are currently working as a translator? Can you put your hand up? Yeah. Okay. Great. Thank you. And what about if you're not currently working as a translator, but you think you might like to in the future? Let's see some hands. Okay, good. Excellent. Okay, I'm going to try not to use too much translator jargon. Okay, I think we better get started on the presentation. I'm not going to be looking at the chat during the presentation because that would be a bit too distracting, but you are, of course, welcome to use it to communicate with each other. So let me get my PowerPoint on screen. Okay, and remove any. Okay, I hope you can see that without too much disruption on the screen. So the title of this talk is Using Your Language Skills to Translate for the European Union. I'm going to talk to you about languages in the European Union and specifically about the role of translators in the EU institutions. Then I'm going to tell you about some of the resources that the EU has developed specifically for translators. And these resources are free to everyone, and that includes you. Then I will talk about the specifics of recruitment of translators for the EU institutions. And at this point, I need to tell you that in order to be eligible to be recruited as a translator for the EU institutions, you need to have citizenship of one of the current 27 EU member states. So you need to have a passport or a valid national identity document of one of the 27 member states. If you have more than one passport, if you have citizenship of another country as well, that's absolutely fine. If you do not have citizenship of one of the 27 member states, the only option to use your language skills for the European Union is as a freelancer working for one of our contractors. And I'm going to tell you more about that during the talk. What I'm not going to talk about is interpreting, because there was a presentation this morning by my colleagues in the interpreting service, so you can go and look at that. One thing I will say, though, is that the nationality requirements are different for interpreters. During this presentation, I'm going to recommend a lot of information sources. There is one handout in the download section, which brings together all of the links that you need. So do please download that. I will be taking questions at the end. Please use the Q&A function to ask me any questions, not the chat, because as I say, I won't be seeing the chat during the presentation. So,
great. Michelle, sorry to interrupt. There is just one grey box on the bottom right of your screen. I don't know whether there's any way you can...
Has it gone yet?
No, it's...
You know what it is? It's the Zoom control. How's that?
No, it's not that. It's a bigger one above. Just to the right of where your cursor is there, yes. It may not be possible to remove.
I don't know what that is, I'm afraid.
Okay, all right. Well, it's not a problem, but I just thought...
What's it obscuring?
Just a little bit of the right of the screen, but that's okay. No problem.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
Okay, good luck.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. So on screen, you can see a message to you in 24 different languages, 24 slightly different messages, in fact. But before I get started, I'm going to introduce myself. My name is Michelle Homden, and I am a translator for the European Union, specifically for the European Commission in the Directorate General for Translation, which is better known as DGT. I'm in the English language department, which means I translate into English, or English is my target language in the jargon. So how did I get here? I studied classics at the University of Edinburgh and then spent time living first in Madrid and then in Paris, where I set about learning languages. I then did a master's in library and information studies in London and spent the next 10 years working in libraries and in information and communications, always in organizations with an international focus where I could use my languages. Along the way, I started learning Italian and modern Greek, in addition to French and Spanish. In 2009, I became a freelance translator of Spanish and French to English. And in 2015, I joined the Commission as a permanent staff member. So I now translate from Spanish, French, Greek, Italian, and Bulgarian into English. So yes, I translate from 5 languages, and in DGT, that's considered not bad. But I have colleagues who translate from 2, 3, and even 4 times that many. We do have a colleague who translates from 20 languages. So if you want to meet some serious linguists, this is the place to come. Okay, the European Union, political and economic union of 27 member states with a few more in the queue to join. There are 24 official languages. And as you can see from the examples on screen, there are also 3 official alphabets. There is the Latin alphabet, which is used for most European languages, the Greek alphabet. Oh, sorry, I meant to show you that example of the Greek alphabet, which self-evidently is used for Greek. Greek is the official language of 2 member states of the European Union, being Greece and Cyprus. And we also have the Cyrillic alphabet here, which is used for Bulgarian. So what are these 24 languages? If you haven't recognized them from the examples on screen, here are their names in English. And this slide is also showing you when these languages became official languages of the EU. So you can see that Dutch, French, German, and Italian have been there since the beginning. Danish and English were added in 1973. 2004 was quite a year, and the most recent addition was Croatian in 2013. Here are the names of the languages in their original form, and this is taken from the front page of Europa, the EU official website. Link in the handout, plenty of content in all of these languages. So why does the EU have so many official languages? Here's the reason. Because it is enshrined in EU law that citizens have the right to use and to receive information in their own language. Now, this slide is very typical of information from the EU. The EU is based on the rule of law and democratic accountability, and we like to cite the legal basis for everything. So if you're looking for information from the EU, for example, about recruitment, you need to get into the habit of doing your own information triage. You might be faced with a web page which is full of hyperlinks, and you have to decide which ones are pointing to the legal basis and which ones are sending you to the information you need for the matter in hand. But what about Brexit, and specifically the status of English as an EU language after Brexit? Is English still an official language of the EU? Yes, it is. English became an official language of the EU, or the European Communities as it was known at the time, back in 1973. And this will not change unless all the 27 current member states agree to it. The slide that you can see mentions Ireland and Malta. Both of these countries have English as one of their official languages, Ireland also has Irish and Malta also has Maltese, but it would be rather inconvenient for the citizens of those countries if English were to cease to be an official EU language. The third bullet point there mentions the procedural languages in the Commission. English, French, and German are the procedural languages. That means that they are the languages used for internal business. So the 24 languages are used when the institutions of the European Union are speaking outwards, addressing the general public in the member states. But within the Commission, for operating purposes, we use English, French, and German. And as you can imagine, English dominates. But what is this Commission of which I'm speaking? It's time to look now at some of the institutions of the European Union. And this slide shows you logos of the institutions that employ translators. At the bottom there, you can see the Translation Centre. They actually provide translations for the smaller bodies that don't have in-house services. The Translation Centre is based in Luxembourg. If there are any fellow classicists among you, you will recognize the word curia, meaning court, is in two of those logos. There at the bottom, you've got the Curia Rationum, that is the Court of Auditors. And above it, you have the Curia, that is the Court of Justice of the European Union, which differs slightly in that they don't employ translators specifically, they employ lawyer linguists. These are linguists with a law degree, excellent knowledge of French and English, and one other EU language. And if that's you or someone you know, keep listening, because there is an important opportunity coming up. In the top row of those logos, you can see the Council of the European Union. That is the governments of the member states. And the European Parliament, this is directly elected. So it is the Council and Parliament that together set the political direction of the European Union. The Council and Parliament decide what the European Union should do, and the body responsible for seeing that it gets done is the European Commission. The European Commission is the executive or the civil service of the European Union, and it also has the largest translation service, and that's where I work. So a bit more about the Commission. So the Commission is responsible for drafting legislation and crucially for ensuring that EU law is kept. The Commission is headed by what we call the College of Commissioners. There are 27, that is one from each of the member states. They elect a president from among their number, and the current president of the European Commission is Ursula von der Leyen, there in the front. She is from Germany, and if you've heard her speaking English or French, you'll know that she is also an excellent linguist. So each of the commissioners is responsible for a specific area of EU policy. What are these areas? This slide is taken from the Commission website, and it shows you some of the areas of the Commission interests. So in my work particularly, the important areas are agriculture, which is food farming, also fisheries, energy, climate, environment, and transport. But some of my colleagues will be more focused on areas such as law, economy, business, finance, overseas development, citizen rights, etc. So there is something to suit all tastes there. The European Commission is organized into Directorates General, or DGs, which are like ministries, if you like. And the largest of these ministries, or Directorates General, is the Directorate General for Translation, better known as DGT. So now I'm going to tell you something about DGT. We translate from and into all of the EU's 24 official languages. Now, the EU is outward facing, it's negotiating, trading, dealing with the rest of the world. But any demand, any requirement for translating into or out of non-EU languages is contracted out to our contractors. Many of our colleagues do know languages which are not official EU languages, and there is some opportunity to use them in-house. overseeing and evaluating the translations which are done externally. However, it's important to stress that the EU institutions do not recruit translators to translate in-house from non-EU languages. There's always an exception, and we currently have in DGT one in-house translator who works in and out of Chinese. There are a few other colleagues in DGT who know Chinese, and they are able to use their Chinese under the supervision of the in-house Chinese language translator. Now, a common question we get is, can I use my Russian? Well, as I said, the EU institutions do not recruit translators to work from non-EU languages, so you would not be recruited as a Russian language translator. However, Russian is useful. I mentioned before that I translate from Bulgarian into English. A few years ago, there was a planning exercise, and it was decided to run an in-house intensive course to train more people to translate from Bulgarian into English. And it was on that course that I found that several of my course mates had previously studied Russian, and that was very useful for them in learning Bulgarian. So there are no useless languages. All language knowledge, all language skills are useful, and you should certainly mention them in your application. Another common question is, which languages are most useful? Well, of course, they're all useful because they all have equal status in the EU. However, there are some languages which are very commonly studied as foreign languages, for example, French, Spanish, Italian. And there are other languages which are less commonly studied as foreign languages. Random examples might be Estonian, Slovenian, and Danish. So if you have one of those less studied languages, you certainly have an advantage because you have something for which there is demand and not much supply. However, I want to make it clear, if the languages that you have are the more commonly studied languages, do not be discouraged from applying, as we still need those languages too. If you are interested in a long-term career in the EU institutions, it's a very good idea to have at least one of the procedural languages as a source language. So what I mean by that is the procedural languages are French, German, and English. If you translate into any language other than English, English is going to be your main source language. If you translate into English, it's a good idea to have either French or German, or indeed both if you like, as your source languages. So let's have a look now at who we are and where we are. As you can see from this slide, the translators for DGT are split between Brussels and Luxembourg, with a very small number of translators located elsewhere. There is a small unit of Irish language translators based in Ireland, in Grange. And in every member state, there is a commission representation. So most of the institutions are in Brussels or Luxembourg. And in all the other member states, there's a commission representation in which there is a DGT field officer. These are translators who are taking a couple of years out from translation to work in outreach. They organise cultural and educational activities and provide careers information. So if you are currently in one of the EU member states, I strongly recommend you find out what your DGT field officer is doing. And if you want to find out how to contact them, the links that you need are in your handout. So if you are recruited to translate for an EU institution, you're probably going to have to move to Brussels or Luxembourg. And unless you live there already, you're probably going to have to change country. And that is quite an adventure. There is, of course, a service to help you settle in, giving you advice and support. And if you do have to move to Brussels or Luxembourg, obviously many of your new colleagues will have been through the same experience, so they'll be there to support you. Okay, so that's who we are and where we are, what do we do? This slide is showing you the language of the original documents, so the documents which DGT translates into one, some, or all of the 24 official languages. And as you can see, the vast majority, nearly 92%, are translated from English into the 23 other EU languages. Why is this? Because English is the principal drafting language of the Commission. The staff across the European Commission largely operate in English. English is the second, if not the first language of most of the staff of the European Commission. So you may be wondering then, what is there for translators into English to do? Well, we translate the documents that arrive externally, the documents that come from the member states. These might be communications, reports, sometimes national legislation, letters from governments and ministries, communications from trade unions, from agricultural organizations, professional bodies, members of the public. In the English language department, we translate from 22 of the other 23 official languages. The only exception is Irish. Irish is handled exclusively by the Irish language department. So if you are a translator into English and you know some Irish and you're thinking, well, I'd like to use my Irish, you wouldn't be recruited to translate from Irish into English, but you would certainly have an opportunity to use your Irish because you would be coming to a place where there are plenty of Irish speakers and they'd be delighted to help you practice. And this goes for everyone. If you translate into any language other than English, English will be your main source language with some opportunity to use French and some pretty limited opportunities to use the other languages, but plenty of opportunities to practice and develop your languages with your colleagues who are also linguists. We have conversation tables, cultural activities. It's a very rich multilingual environment. Of course, many people like to learn even more languages in their spare time. Some of the languages which colleagues of mine learn purely for fun include Welsh, Persian, and Swahili. But I do not want you to think that translators for the European institutions spend all our time with our noses in grammar books or glued to language apps. We do other things. We take exercise, very important if you are a translator, as it can be a rather sedentary occupation. DGT in Brussels has its own running club. I am the coordinator and we are always delighted to welcome new members. There is a commission-wide running club, swimming club, cycling club, very popular hiking club, chess club, wine tasting circle, all kinds of cultural and sporting activities. And of course, all these clubs are open to staff from the other institutions and in most cases to members of the public as well, because they are very friendly and welcoming clubs. Colleagues in Brussels and Luxembourg have access to a very rich cultural offering, plenty of theatres, concerts, cinemas, film festivals. Colleagues in Luxembourg particularly appreciate the access to the countryside. It's a wonderful place to live if you enjoy hill walking. Here in Brussels, we benefit from the well-developed Belgian rail network. So if you fancy some fresh air, you can get to the Ardennes or to the coast. So there is plenty to nurture body and soul. What else do we do in DGT apart from translating? This slide shows you some of our other activities. The UNES Translatores referred to there is a translation competition for young people. That strange blob in the bottom row, that represents e-translation. That is the in-house machine translation system, which is available to public administrations and universities. More information about that in your handout. So a very common question is, do you use Google Translate? And the answer is no, we do not. Use of Google Translate is banned in the European institutions because whatever you put into Google belongs to Google, and some of our documents are rather too sensitive for that. So that is why DGT has developed its own machine translation system, and I think we're justified in saying it's probably one of the most sophisticated in the world. You are linguists, so you don't need me to tell you that you should only use machine translation in your work if you are confident that you can spot and correct any mistakes. Machine translation is a very powerful tool, and it should therefore only be used in skilled hands. This brings me on to some of the resources that DGT produces, which are available to everyone. First up is IATE, the Interactive Terminology for Europe. This is maintained by dedicated teams of terminologists within DGT who are recruited in the same way as translators. We also offer a number of traineeships for terminologists, so if you think that would be useful, keep listening. IATE covers all 24 EU languages, plus Latin for botanical and zoological names, and some other languages as well. So here is an example of an entry from IATE for the term disinformation. There is a definition here, deliberately false information. This definition is taken from a publicly available source, which is the Oxford English Dictionary. There is also a note telling you not to confuse it with misinformation, which also has an entry in IATE. You can see that I've got both the French and English terms on screen. In fact, it's possible to display a number of language versions at once, but 2 is quite enough for a PowerPoint slide. IATE is a goldmine. It is very, very useful, but it may be a goldmine. Not everything in it is 24 karat. IATE has been around for a long time. It was originally an amalgam of a number of terminology databases. Some of the entries are now quite old. There are some duplicate entries. A lot of work is being done on tidying up and updating, but you may come across some entries which are not entirely satisfactory, and I wouldn't want that to put you off, because it really is very, very useful, and it is available absolutely free to any translator or anyone who wants to use it. Another useful resource is EURLEX. This is the legal database. This contains all EU legislation, case law, access to the official journal in all of the 24 languages. And a particularly useful feature that you can see is up to 3 language versions can be displayed at once. I'd also like to mention the English Style Guide. If you are a translator, you'll know that it's very useful to have at least a couple of style guides to give you ideas. The English Style Guide is put together by experienced translators. It's updated frequently. Current version has good advice on inclusive language, which is very important. And along with the Style Guide, we have the Country Compendium, and this is a really, really useful document. It's an overview of the 24 member states and some others, including the UK, China, and Turkey. It's an overview of the government, administrative, and judicial systems. And all the links that you need are in your handout. So now we're going to talk about working in and with DGT, DG Translation. But what I'm going to tell you is broadly applicable to the other institutions of the EU as well, for translators, that is. If you have any interest whatsoever in working for the EU as a translator, this is the most important slide of the presentation. Beware of misinformation. I say misinformation and not disinformation. And if you're not sure of the difference, consult IATE. But there is a lot of misinformation about recruitment procedures for translators to the EU institutions. There seems to be a perception that EU recruitment procedures are set in stone and never change, and nothing could be further from the truth. There are different types of selection procedures, which I'm going to tell you about, and no 2 recruitment selection procedures are ever the same. There is only one authoritative source of information for EU careers, and that is EPSO, the European Personnel and Selection Office. Please bookmark that link and visit it frequently, and beware of misinformation from other sources. You can also consult the official journal, which is available through ULEX. There is one other source which I am pleased to recommend, and that is a Facebook group. It is run by translators from DGT. Two of the most active users are my colleagues John Evans and Paul Kay. They are former field officers from London, from when there was a Commission representation in London, when the UK was still a member of the EU. They are very, very experienced in handing out careers advice. If you join that Facebook group, they would be delighted to interact with you. So let's move on to look at different types of post in DGT. Job opportunities. So first up, permanent posts. Permanent staff members are known as commission officials, or sometimes by the French term fonctionnaire. Then we have staff on fixed-term contracts, temporary agents and contract agents. So those are two different types of post with fixed-term contracts. Trainees, we do love a Gallicism here, and we tend to refer to our trainees as stagiaires. I'll tell you more about those opportunities in a moment. I mentioned earlier external contractors. So DGT does not translate non-EU languages. We contract them out to external contractors. But in addition, we contract out a lot of translations into and out of EU languages. DGT does not have capacity to cover all the demand for translation into and out of the 24 EU languages. So we work extensively with external translators who are in effect translation agencies. Now, you can see freelance translators there in square brackets. So translation agencies rely very heavily on freelance translators. But the employment relationship between freelance translators and external contractors is the main employment relationship. Sorry, let me restate that. If you are a freelance translator, your main employment relationship will be with the translation agency, the external contractor, and not with the European Commission or with any other EU institution. So therefore, the nationality requirements of the EU do not apply. Translation agencies are, of course, free to set their own criteria. A little bit more information about external contractors. In 2019, there was a new procedure put in place called TRAD 19, a type of framework contract which entered into force in 2020. So now for each language combination, there is one main contractor with a few backups. So DGT is currently working with 66 different contractors, that is translation agencies, and they cover 46 language combinations. So all of these translation agencies must be based in an EU member state, or at least have an office in an EU member state, but they are free to work with whomever they wish. If you represent a translation agency, you might like to know that there will be a new call for tender next year, and that will be published in the usual place, and the link's in the handout. If you are a freelance translator, you would probably like to know who these 66 contractors covering 46 language combinations are. There is a link in your handout to the list. So let's look now at staff in the EU institutions and the eligibility criteria. So we mentioned you must be an EU citizen, but I want to make it clear that there is no correlation between the nationality stated on your passport and the languages into which you translate or from which you translate. So if you happen to have an Italian passport because your nonna was from Napoli and Italy is famously generous to its diaspora, No one is going to tell you that you have to translate into or out of Italian. There is no connection. There is no requirement to be a native speaker, so-called, of your target language, nor is there any requirement for you to translate into your so-called mother tongue, as these are rather nebulous terms. We have a number of translators in the English language department who did not grow up speaking English, who did not grow up in English-speaking countries. However, they have got themselves to the level where they can translate into English to the standard required. It is, of course, extremely difficult to learn to write to professional standard in another language, but frankly, some of my colleagues are very clever. This slide says that you must hold a full university degree in languages or another field. In other words, any field, any degree. You are not required to have a degree in modern languages. Excuse me, I do not have a degree in modern languages. I do not have a master's in translation. Many of my colleagues do have those qualifications. They are excellent qualifications to have. If you have those qualifications, well done you, but they are not a requirement. You simply need a university degree. The slide also says no professional experience is required. However, as in any recruitment procedure, experience is always an advantage, not only translation experience, but any professional or life experience you have that's relevant to the interests of the European Union. Is there an age limit? Yes, there is. It's called retirement. As is reasonable, if you are applying for a fixed term contract, you would need to be of an age where you could complete the term of the contract before you reach compulsory retirement age. So if you're in your early 60s, you would need to look carefully at the recruitment criteria. If you're in your 50s or your 40s or your 30s or your 20s, you're fine. I mentioned traineeships, or as we like to call them, stage. They're known as the Blue Book for some historical reason, which I can't remember. It's quite a lot of information on this slide, so I'll give you a moment just to look at that. You can see that there is a monthly grant because we say down with unpaid internships. Our trainees or stagiaires tend to be people in their 20s or early 30s who are starting out in their professional life, but this is not a requirement. And we have had stagiaires who are older, who are thinking of changing career, and it's good to have them. I didn't do a stage myself, I had a different career path, but many of my colleagues did. And that's telling us two things. It's telling us first that doing a traineeship or a stage is excellent preparation for a career in the European institutions as a translator. And it's also telling us that people who come here and get a taste of life as a translator often want to stay. So those are the traineeships. Links are in your handout. Now let's look at the permanent officials or fonctionnaires. They are recruited through an open competition process. It's traditionally known as le concours. The not so good news is that there are no plans on the horizon at the moment to hold a concours for translators, but should that change, it will be announced by EPSO. The good news, if you have a law degree, excellent French and English, and another EU language, is that the European Court of Justice that I mentioned earlier will be recruiting lawyer linguists in an open competition process next year. So if you have those qualifications, check out the link on the handout, because that could be a very rewarding career. The first time in 10 years that they're holding an open competition. It really is a great opportunity. So now let's look at the fixed term contracts. And as I mentioned, there are two types. We have contract agents and temporary agents. So contract agents are selected via a procedure called CAST using the contract agent selection tool. And again, I'll give you a moment just to look at that information. I'm aware that I'm going quite quickly because I want to have time to take your questions at the end. You can always go back and look at these slides again if you wish. So the important point about the CAST procedure is that interested candidates can register at any time. You can do it this afternoon if you like. There's no deadline. You register, and institutions that want to recruit translators can consult the database, identify potential candidates, and invite them to sit the selection tests. So those are contract agents. Now we have temporary agents, and the difference here is that temporary agents are recruited as part of specific selection and recruitment procedures, which are announced by EPSO and which have specific deadlines. Again, I'll give you just a moment. So as part of the procedure, a list of successful candidates is compiled. It's valid for 2 years. I'm afraid there's no guarantee that you'll get a post if you're on the list, but you certainly won't get a post if you're not on the list. You'll have noticed that both contract agents and temporary agents are able to serve contracts for a fixed period, up to 6 years in the case of contract agents. It's not quite so specific in the case of temporary agents, but this doesn't mean that at the end of that contract you have to pack up and go home. Many people then go on to take different types of posts or work for different institutions. And of course, once you've worked one contract in an institution, you've got lots of very valuable professional experience that will make you attractive to other institutions that are recruiting. So the main differences then between contract agents and translation agents, temporary agents, are the ways in which they are recruited. There's one other significant one: money. You can see that contract agents are on a lower salary than temporary agents and officials. It's still a reasonable salary. You can live comfortably on that. The Commission is generally a good employer. I'm actually saying that sincerely. The working conditions are good. Childcare arrangements, parental leave, that kind of thing is generous. And now I have some good news for you if you are interested in working as a translator for the European Commission. There are plans in the foreseeable future to run selection procedures for temporary agents, those are the better paid ones, translating into certain languages. I say in the foreseeable future, I can't be any more specific than that at the moment. The languages into which the temporary agents will be required to translate are as follows: Croatian, Dutch, Hungarian, Portuguese, and English. Yes, we will be recruiting translators into English at some point in the reasonably near future. So if you are interested, bookmark that EPSO website, check it frequently, and consider joining the Facebook group. Okay, that's the end of my presentation. The Commission presence on social media, all the links available on the website through the handout. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias, mnogo благодаря, and all the rest. Now, let's see if I can exit this presentation and go to the Q&A to answer your questions. Let's have a look, Q&A. Okay, I think, by the way, I think we've got, okay, technically, I think we're at the end of the presentation, but I can stay around for at least 10 minutes to answer your questions. So let's have a look. Kieran, I'm assuming then that UK translators will have to freelance. Yes, I'm afraid if you have only UK nationality, then I'm very, very sorry to tell you that you're not eligible to be recruited by an EU institution. However, if you have UK nationality and the nationality of one of the 27 member states, then you are eligible. Next question from Alicia. Does one also need an MA in conference interpreting? I don't know very much about interpreting, I'm afraid, because it's a separate profession and handled separately. But I'd strongly recommend that you look at the presentation that was given this morning about interpreting for the EU. Do also have a look on EPSO, because obviously they cover recruitment of interpreters as well as translators. Yeah, I'm sorry about the black rectangle. So this is from Malika. Is it possible to have the PowerPoint? Yes, I should think so. If there's anything specific you missed in the PowerPoint, do let me know here in the Q&A. Vera, 1,000 interpreters are civil servants. There are many more freelance interpreters. Yes, interpretation, as I said, is handled differently. The 4,000 translators are all civil servants of the European Union, yeah. Alicia is now asking about Polish. Polish is an EU language. Lots of Polish speakers, so yes, it's an EU language like all the others. Anonymous attendee, hello there. How can we apply to be a translator for the EU? Okay, well, I think I've just told you that. You probably asked that question earlier. Yes, I can see that you did. So I hope I've answered it by now. Sorry, I'm confused. If you're based in England, then you can't apply because we're no longer in the EU. Okay, yeah, thanks for asking this question because I want to clarify. It doesn't matter where you're based at the moment. What matters is if you have citizenship of a current member state of the European Union. So if you are living in England or indeed in any other part of the world, that's not an issue. The issue is, do you have a passport or a national identity document of one of the EU member states? We have a number of colleagues in DGT who grew up in other parts of the world, Australia, Canada, the United States, South Africa, but they have EU citizenship either through family heritage or because they've subsequently come to live and work in Europe and they've applied for and gained citizenship in one of the EU member states. Okay, I hope that answers the question. Where's the handout you mentioned? It is, you should be able to see it. It's in the section called download, I think. Let me see if I can see it. I don't know if Jonathan is still with us, if he can tell us. Is anyone else having trouble finding the handout? It should be there in your Zoom. Oh, thank you from Rowan. Go to the main page of the talk. Yes, okay, thanks to everyone who's answering that question. That's very helpful of you. Lucia is looking for the recruiting agencies. No, the recruiting agency, Lucia, that is EPSO. Okay, that's EPSO, and the link is in your handout. Okay. P.S. I'm Italian, but I don't speak like that. Like what? Like me speaking Italian? No, well, I hope your Italian accent is better than mine. Anonymous attendee again. So are UK nationals entitled to be temporary or contract agents? Again, if you have UK nationality and the nationality of one of the EU member states, then you are entitled to, you are eligible to be recruited as a temporary or contract agent. But if you have only UK nationality, then I'm afraid not, because the UK is no longer a member of the European Union. What is the retirement age? Is this flexible or is it fixed? That's a very good question. I think it's 65. These things do actually change. So you should carefully check the criteria in any selection procedure. Okay, that's an important point in general. Every time a selection procedure is announced, check the criteria carefully and don't be misled by what may have happened in the past, because things change all the time. Vera, I think that's really the same question again, Vera. Can a British person apply only if you also have nationality of an EU member state? Okay, so I think that's all the questions. So thank you very much for your participation. Do please download that handout, and very best of luck with your future careers. Goodbye now. Thank you. I've just opened the chat, actually. There's some kind comments. Thank you for your comments. Sorry about the grey square, everyone. We really did try to get rid of it. Okay, thanks everyone. Goodbye now.